Welcome to Chapter 6, Psycho-Social Development in Infancy. So in this chapter, we're going to take a look at how infants develop relationships with others and how the social interaction affects them as well as the people around them. Let's begin by defining what a relationship is as we talk about the meaning of relationships for infants. So a relationship is a pattern of intermittent interactions between two people involving interchanges over an extended period of time. And so we know that there are many different aspects of development that end up affecting the child's relationships with the people around them. For example, with physical aspects of development, the infant is learning to walk, run, and play with others. And this, of course, affects their relationships. So perhaps whoever plays with them and runs with them are the people they end up building relationships with. Language aspects involve talking with other people. The cognitive aspects of the infant's development involve understanding others. Emotional aspects of the infant's development involve making commitments to other people in terms of relationships and promises about playing later on together, things of that nature. And then finally, social aspects of development have to do with the infant's ability to relate with others and the way people relate with the infant. So infants do initiate social contact by turning their head towards the mother or by gesturing, often pointing at the person they want to talk to or reaching up to interact with their mother or their father or the people around them. And so family members will try to get the infant's attention, but ultimately the baby will decide who they want to attend to. They might reach again for the person they want or turn their head away from a person they don't want. So infants certainly do have a say in structuring their relationships, and this is heavily based on their temperament. They tend to like people that have a similar temperament as they do. If they're energetic, they want to be around someone else who is energetic. Or if they're anxious or uncomfortable, they might want to be around a more calming force. So the relationships that the family has with each other also end up affecting the infant and the consequent parent-child relationships. So the infant is observing the interaction between mother and father, the interaction between mother and other siblings, for example, and the interaction from sibling to sibling. And this does end up affecting the people that the infant decides to interact with further. So, for example, marital conflict can cause illness in the infant, even stress, and then end up affecting the way they interact with their peers. Because ultimately they might just be imitating what they've seen, or they might feel anxious, and then this affects how they are engaging with other people around them. Let's take a look at characteristics of the developing relationship. What type of behavior does the child need from the parent? And when is certain behavior appropriate? Two researchers by the name of Brazelton and Kramer have identified the following characteristics of a healthy parent-infant relationship. The first of which is synchrony. So synchrony is the ability of the parent to adjust their behavior to that of an infant. So this requires the parent to be observant of what is going on with their infant. For example, the infant's focus is really on regulating their heart rate and breathing, and this actually demands most of their energy and attention. Parents that recognize this use their own behavior to help the infant through this process, perhaps by talking to the infant softly or stroking the infant. The next characteristic of a healthy relationship is symmetry. You can kind of think of this as mirroring. So the infant will have a certain capacity for attention, how much stimulation it can take in. And then the parent's style of responding will influence the child's actions. So the way that the child interacts with their parents reflects their temperament. They might require more stimulation and more attention, or less stimulation and less attention. Maybe too much stimulation makes them anxious or nervous. Maybe too little stimulation makes them want more attention and they become bored and cranky. So this tells the parent what and how much stimuli the infant can tolerate. And so the parent then would want to respond accordingly. And so this is where the mirroring, or you really see the symmetry come into play. The child needs a certain amount of attention, and then the parent gives that certain amount of attention accordingly. The next characteristic is known as entrainment, and this is really the rhythm that is established between a parent and an infant's behavior. And the sequence involved in entrainment usually leads to game playing. For example, the baby might reach its hands out to the mother, and then the mother makes a funny face, and the child smiles. And so it's really about the back and forth between the mother and the child being able to know how the mother or father is going to react, or even a sibling or a grandparent. And then the mother, father, or sibling, or grandparent knowing how the baby is going to react. So it's a back and forth that's kind of predictable between the two sides of the relationship. And then the last characteristic is autonomy. And so the definition of autonomy is a self-governing state. But as it relates to infants, this is when infants realize that they have a share in controlling their interactions with others. And this occurs at around 6 months. So they start to feel a sense of independence about being able to establish and maintain relationships with other people, about choosing who they want to interact with, even about choosing the length of how long they want to interact with someone. How do children develop relationships? Well, the primary caregiver is going to play a major role in the development of these relationships. In a lot of cases, the primary caregiver is the mother, but not always. For example, in my life, my father was my primary caregiver, and for other people, it might be their grandparents or even a sibling. It just depends on the circumstances of their life. But I'm going to give this information in the context of the mother because that's what we see to be true for the majority of babies. So infants focus their attention on the mother because they see them as a source of comfort. And since the attention is being placed on the mother is able to really attend to the child's needs, and one of the ways they do this is by recognizing the different cries that the child makes, which we talked about in chapter 5, that each cry has a different intention behind it. So certain cries indicate hunger, certain cries indicate attention, fear, etc. And so when the child gets attended to based on the way they're crying, this reinforces the child's focus on the mother and that the mother is comforting. And this really creates this interactive relationship. It's certainly the basis for the way the relationship will develop going forward. So why do children need a relationship? Why is it sort of hardwired in them to go about developing relationships with the people around them? There may be 3 motives that explain the reason why children develop relationships. The first motive is bodily needs. We know that children have needs that have to do with their physical development, such as getting food, having their diaper changed, when they're sick, getting the proper treatment. The next motive is psychological needs. Children seek novelty. They want to look at new things. Remember, they habituate, like we've talked about before. And because of habituation, they need increasing stimulation, different things to look at, interaction. And so the adults around them are generally the source of this information. And then the third motive is adult response needs. The child needs the adult to be responsive so that they can feel safe and secure, so that they know that they're not being neglected and they can trust that their needs will be met. So let's take a look at the timeline of how relationships develop. Generally, in the first 3 weeks, the infant's focus is primarily on their own physical development, maintaining, breathing, and regulating their heartbeat. And so during the first 3 weeks, they're not so much affected by the adult interaction. But then by the start of week 4, infants do begin to direct their attention towards the primary caregivers in their life, and they begin to express emotions. Usually, the first emotion that we see is pleasure at the sight and sound of adults. And then in month 2, we'll start to see the infant smile and vocalize at the mother or the primary caregiver and begin to engage in more animated behavior. And then finally, by month 3, the need for social interaction is developed. The need for relationships is developed. And then that need is maintained throughout life. To demonstrate this need for social interaction from their primary caregiver, in other words, to demonstrate the infant's adult response needs, we're going to watch an experiment called the still face experiment that does a great job of illustrating how a child relies on adults and really needs that interaction and relationship.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Let's take a look at the role of reciprocal interactions in the developing infant. So reciprocal interactions are interactions that result in mutual changes. For example, the way you act changes the way I behave, and the way I act changes the way you behave. So this is definitely true with infants, but it's true with all of us. I'm sure you've had experiences where you're in a good mood and then someone starts talking to you with a rude tone of voice, and then it puts you in a bad mood and you start talking to them with a rude tone of voice. These are reciprocal interactions, and so we have an effect on one another, and we have an effect on the way we interact with each other, and people affect our moods, which in turn affects the way we talk to them and deal with them. And so this is true in infant caregiver relationships as well. So infants instantly interpret and react to how they are being treated, just like you or I would do. Not only do children make sense of the world cognitively, like we talked about in Chapter 5, they also tune into the social and emotional components of the world. So they're very aware of what is going on with other people in terms of their tone of voice, their facial expressions, and the way infants interpret this information and react to it really shapes the tone of their relationships. And so the way the parent plays, discipline, explains information to the child produces a change in that child. And that change produces a change in the parent. So for example, if the parent is very patient with the child, then the child's going to feel more at ease. And when the child's more at ease, the parent's going to feel more at ease. But if the parent is stern in its discipline or short with the child, this is going to produce a little nervousness in the child, a little anxiousness. Maybe the child then becomes defensive. And when the child becomes defensive or standoffish, this could cause the parent to then become frustrated and defensive and standoffish. The way the child stares, coos, smiles, kicks, produces a change in the parent. And that change produces a change in the child. So maybe the child is smiling, and this makes the parent smile, makes the parent feel happy, even if they had just gotten home from a rough day at work. And so when the parent is smiling and the parent is happy, this then makes the child feel more excited and happy and energetic. And so the quality of these reciprocal interactions really establish the nature of the relationship between the parent and the caregiver. They create a sort of foundation. And so this allows the child to react to the parent's touch, tone of voice, playful nature, in a way where the child kind of knows what to expect from the parent or can get a sense of stability based on previous reciprocal interactions. Go ahead and pause the video here and head on over to Moodle to complete lecture activity 1. Once you have completed that activity, return to this point in the video. See you then. One of the behaviors that developmental psychologists observe in parents are parental roles, their expectations for their relationships. So let's start by looking at what a role is. A role is a behavior or expectancies about behavior associated with a particular position in society. For example, when you think about a police officer or a doctor or a waitress, you have an idea of how they act, how they should behave, how they should dress, how they should carry themselves, and these are all really roles. So most of us have roles that we are playing out in our lives unconsciously. I probably have an idea of how a professor should speak and act, and so I'm sort of altering or changing my behavior unconsciously in a involuntary way without really knowing to match that role of what I perceive a professor to look like. And so parents do the same thing. Mothers and fathers have expectations about how they should behave in their role. They have an idea of how a mother acts, and then many of us just try to act out that role. And so the way parents exercise this role and how the child responds to this determines the success of the relationship. Ideally, or in a perfect world, the parents' ideas about their role would mesh perfectly with the child's personalities, abilities, and temperament. But usually that's not the case, and it's often said that we should parent to the child, rather than expecting the child to change to the way we parent, because each child is different, and so we need to pay attention to the child's needs, rather than trying to impose what we believe a mother or father should look like onto them in its entirety. Of course, there's a healthy balance between the two of those ideas. So one of the things that developmental psychologists encourage parents to look at is something called ghosts in the nursery, which are the influence that are affecting the way you think a parent should act. So parents need to consider who could be influencing their idea of the parent role. Are they parenting like their parents, even if they disagree with the way their parents behaved? But again, this is kind of happening unconsciously, so they're just mimicking what they saw their parents do when they grew up, even if it wasn't necessarily something that they liked. Does the child remind them of someone of their past and they are parenting in reaction to this? Are they imitating a friend they admire? Are they trying to match a role described by an expert they saw on the news? These would all be considered ghosts in the nursery, or influences on the parent's idea of what a parent should look like. So when parents identify these ghosts, then they can take the positive and they can dispose of the negative behaviors. So it's really about self-awareness and then choosing the appropriate behaviors for your child rather than just kind of unconsciously doing what you think a parent should do. So attachment is one of the most important concepts in developmental psychology because it's one of the most important concepts in a child's life. The roots of our future relationships are formed during the first few days of our lives and then are reinforced thereafter. And one of the major factors in these roots of future relationships is the attachment that we form with our caregiver. So attachment is defined as behavior intended to keep a child or adult in close proximity to a significant other. So what a healthy attachment or a secure attachment would look like is the child being able to be independent and explore and play with some confidence and a sense of autonomy, but the child also being comfortable coming back to the parent in a time of stress or when it needs comforting. So the main researcher on attachment was John Bowlby, and he studied attachment in parent-infant relationships. So he started out studying children that were suffering from negative family experiences early in life, for example, absentee mothers. And he used concepts from psychology and ethology. Ethology is the study of behavior in natural settings, to formulate his hypothesis. And so his main hypothesis was that a warm, intimate relationship between a mother and a child is really essential to that child's mental health, not only as they're developing, but throughout their whole life. And so he argued that an infant's needs for a mother's presence is as great as the infant's need for food. And one of the reasons he argued that was because of the study that a researcher named Harlow did involving monkeys, and I'll be showing you that study shortly. The absence of the mother can generate a sense of loss and anger in the child, according to Bowlby. And he says that it is important to note that while generally we see the principal attachment being to the natural mother, it can in fact be to anyone that is acting as that child's primary caregiver. So Bowlby developed what he called attachment theory, and the way he developed this was by studying children that were 15 to 30 months old that had been separated from their parents and were placed in a hospital or a nursery. And in studying them, he found that a predictable sequence of behaviors was occurring. And so the first component of the sequence was protest, and the infants would begin immediately crying, and this lasted about 1 week. And so protest would look like loud crying, extreme restlessness, and rejection of all adults. And then the behavior would progress into the next component of the sequence, which was called despair. And in despair, this behavior would suggest a growing hopelessness, monotonous crying from the infant, inactivity, and steady withdrawal from the world around it. And then the last component of this progression was detachment. And this is where the child displays apathy, regains interest in the environment, but a kind of distant interest, even if the mother does end up reappearing. So let's watch a video that goes, that takes a more in-depth look at Bowlby and his attachment theory, as well as how he developed it.
Researchers organize their research by formulating and answering a question. This helps them focus the research process so that they can draw conclusions reflecting the real world in the best possible way. An aspect of the attachment theory that highlights the importance of methodology is John Bowlby's maternal deprivation hypothesis, or the theory that breaking the mother's bond with the child during the early years will have intellectual, social, and emotional effects. An initial study undertaken by Bowlby at the time of the Second World War, commonly referred to as his study of 44 juvenile thieves, investigated the effects of maternal deprivation on juvenile delinquency. He interviewed 44 adolescents who were referred to his clinic in London because of stealing, and to act as a control group selected another group of 44 children with emotional problems but who had not committed any crimes. He interviewed the parents from both groups to state whether their children had experienced separation during the critical period and for how long. Each child had their IQ tested by a psychologist who also assessed the child's emotional attitudes towards the tests. At the same time, a social worker interviewed a parent to record details of the child's early life. The psychologist and social worker made separate reports. The findings showed that more than half of the juvenile thieves were separated from their mothers for longer than 6 months during the first 5 years, and that 32% were affectionless psychopaths, a term coined by Bowlby meaning that they were lacking guilt or remorse. As a result of the research, Bowlby concluded that there can be little doubting that for the affectionless thief, nurture, not nature, is to blame. There is a very strong case indeed for believing that prolonged separation of a child from his mother or mother substitute during the first 5 years of life stands foremost among the causes of delinquent character development. Contemporaries of Bowlby working in the United States and also interested in the effects of maternal deprivation were René Spitz and Catherine Wolfe. They observed 123 babies for the first year of their lives who were being cared for by their unmarried mothers in a prison. When the infants were between 6 and 8 months, the mothers were temporarily moved to another block and the infants looked after by other people. During the 3-month separation, the child either did not see its mother at all or at best once a week. Each baby was looked after by the mother of another child or a girl in the later stages of pregnancy. Spitz and Wolfe noted that the babies cried more, they lost their appetites and failed to gain weight. When they were reunited with their mothers, their conditions returned to what they were before the separation. The researchers concluded that these reactions were the result of being separated from their mothers. Harry Harlow, working with rhesus monkeys, wanted to study the cupboard love theory, or the idea that we attach to the person who feeds us.
Now here are 106's two mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch. He's going to the wire mother. He's got to eat to live. Oh, he's going back. He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends from 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother.
3 years later, Harlow reported on the same isolated monkeys. They were much more timid and did not know how to act when put in a cage with other monkeys and became prime targets for bullying. The conclusion Harlow drew from this study was that their psychological and emotional behavior suffered due to maternal deprivation. However, further studies that raised the same monkeys but allowed them 20 minutes a day with 3 other monkeys found that even this level of interaction was enough to teach them basic social skills. Harlow's research did not show that the infant monkeys were suffering from the absence of a mother figure or maternal deprivation, but rather from social deprivation. Similarly, many psychologists agree that short-term separation produces distress in children, as described by Spitz and Wolfe, but there is a disagreement about the significance. In the long term, at least, the study could not prove that these babies needed their own particular mothers, but only showed how they become more agitated or depressed when their routines were upset or disrupted. Bowlby's study of 44 thieves involved a pre-selected sample from his own clinic and used retrospective evidence which could be influenced by distorted memories. Instead of considering any number of confounding factors, for example the reason for the separation in the first place, like other researchers at the time and since, he saw a correlation and assumed a causation, despite the fact 27 of the 44 juvenile thieves had not suffered from maternal deprivation. The hypothesis that separation from an established mother figure in early childhood has a detrimental effect on a child's later mental health is widely promulgated and commonly accepted both in academic and lay circles. The hypothesis continues to have a significant effect on mothers' decision as to whether they should resume work and on governmental policy concerning the provision of childcare facilities. The evidence for this hypothesis does not satisfy the requirements of scientific methodology. The theory that a child's attachment to its mother figure is the emotional basis for its future love relationships is still accorded similar acceptance without further evidence than that supporting the original hypothesis.
Let's continue looking at some attachment research. So Mary Ainsworth was a student of John Bowlby, and she developed one of the most popular experiments in attachment, which she called the strange situation. In the strange situation, I'll be showing you a video shortly, the mother and infant go into an observation room where they're observed by researchers, and as the mother and infant are in this room, a stranger walks in. And so the researchers measure the child's reaction as the mom and stranger are talking. Then the mom leaves the room, and the researchers observe the child's reaction once the mom is gone. And then the mom comes back into the room, and again the child's reaction is measured by the researchers. And then finally, the mom and stranger leave the room and then come back, first the stranger, then the mom. And the child's reaction to this is also measured. And so by observing the different reactions that the child had, we were able to put children into different categories of attachment. So the first attachment style that was reflected or seen during this experiment was what is known as a secure attachment. So a secure attached child would employ the mother as kind of a home base. They would explore independently but come back to her occasionally. So this is healthy. This is what we want to see in most children. And when the mom left, the child would cry, and when the mom would return, the child would go to the mother and be comforted by her. And so securely attached children tend to grow up to have less psychological difficulties and more successful relationships. The next type of attachment that was observed in the strange situation was avoidant attachment. And these children didn't cry when the mother would leave the room. They would avoid her when she returned. It's kind of as if they were indifferent to whether or not she was there. So this isn't a very healthy attachment style. The next style was ambivalent attachment. And this is when children display anxiety before they are even separated. They already are seeming kind of nervous or uncomfortable. And they do get upset when the mother leaves, but when the mother would come back, they might hug her at first and then hit her. So they were kind of all over the place and not really consistent in their behavior, which is also not a very healthy form of attachment. And then finally, there was disorganized, disoriented attachment styles observed in children. And these children showed the most inconsistent, contradictory behavior. The child really seems confused from the moment they enter the experiment until it's over, and they do not act the same throughout. So sometimes they might seem nervous, upset, unsure of what's happening, uncomfortable, and this really is regardless of what's going on with the mother, whether she's in the room or out of the room. And so then this is going to also be an unhealthy style of attachment. So let's take a look at Mary Ainsworth's strange situation to get a better understanding of what we were looking at here as developmental psychologists.
Studying attachment is not straightforward. One way is to observe the children in the home setting relating to mother, father, or other children. But can the essential elements of home life be translated into a standard laboratory setting for controlled scientific study? After conducting extensive observations of parents and children at home, a student of Bowlby's, Mary Ainsworth, devised such a procedure, called the strange situation, which places the child under some stress. It has become the most widely used, standardized way to assess the quality of a child's attachment to their caregiver. Here the researchers are recording how 14-month-old Lisa responds in this attractive but unfamiliar setting. How will she react to a stranger? What will happen when her mother leaves the room? And when she returns? It's Lisa's behavior when her mother returns, what psychologists call the reunion, that they are particularly interested in.
Most importantly is to look for the type of balance that a child strikes between an attachment need and, on the other hand, to explore the play material.
Once Lisa has settled down to play, a stranger enters the room and sits in the chair reading a magazine.
Lisa, where's the bow? Where's the bow?
After a couple of minutes, the stranger attempts to interact with Lisa. Soon after, Lisbeth gets a cue to leave the room. The stranger tries to comfort Lisa, but in vain. Lisbeth comes back into the room and the camera records how Lisa reacts. Now the first part of the procedure is over, and Lisbeth settles Lisa down again. The stranger leaves them alone together. And soon after, Lisbeth goes too. Lisa is on her own. Her distress is plain to see. Once again, the efforts of the stranger to console Lisa are to no avail. But Lisbeth manages to calm her almost at once, and shortly afterwards the observation ends. Lisa showed outward signs of what's called secure attachment. Can these signs give us an idea of what's going on inside the child's mind? John Bowlby used the idea of an internal working model to describe this. Howard Steele, another attachment researcher, explains what this means.
Some people express the internal working model in the following terms, that the child who behaves securely, if you like, in the strain situation, has a model of the parent as available and loving, and a complementary model of the self as worthy of that love.
When data from a number of strange situations are coded and analysed, secure attachments are usually found in about 60% of the cases.
Be quite nice.
Another child, 1-year-old Eva, clearly behaves differently from Lisa during this first part of the procedure, after she's been left alone for a short time.
She's first glancing at the mother, then glancing again at the mother. You would expect now that she would seek proximity, a little bit distracted by the stranger. This takes a long time before she's oriented the mother again, isn't it?
Although she looks, but only shortly.
She's clearly distressed, so you would think that she would seek proximity, but she's just...
She remains playing with the ball.
Yeah. So more or less focused on play material, and not letting her emotions go and seek proximity to the mother, get a reassurance.
Coding and classifying behaviour in the strange situation is not always straightforward. Eva behaved differently in this second reunion to how she'd done in the first. Some of her reactions show signs of what Ainsworth describes as insecure avoidant attachment.
On the other hand,
how are avoidant attachments represented in the internal working model?
This is a mother who has communicated to his or her child, if you're distressed, try to keep grips on it. Try to have a stiff upper lip. Try to pull yourself together. Try to be independent. Try to learn to deal with it on your own.
Although the strange situation is used extensively in attachment research, some other psychologists who have studied children's relationships have reservations.
I think the problem is making inferences about the relationship from how children behave in the strange situation, because it is exactly that, a strange situation. Because the tricky thing is, what does the situation mean to the child? It means something probably very different for a child who's been in daycare since early in the first year, and the same is true for children from different cultures, for whom this experience may have very different meaning again.
Despite such criticisms, this 20-minute strange situation procedure is still widely used and believed to indicate the relationship between the child and, in this case, the mother. It is considered to highlight important qualities of the attachment and show significant links with other aspects of the child's experience and behavior.
The child's representation of his or her relationship with mother from the first year of life carries over to the child's behavior with peers at 2, 3, 4 years of age, such that children who look securely attached in the strained situation to mother at 1 year are getting on better with peers in the preschool, able to work cooperatively on tasks, resolve dilemmas, conflicts that emerge, often without resorting to the teacher.
What I'd like you to do is pause the video here, head on over to Moodle, complete lecture activity 2, which is a pretty short one, and then go ahead and come right back. We've talked a lot about attachment between the child and mother, but what did Bowlby observe in the attachment between the child and the father? What he found was that the child can experience one of the 4 types of attachment with the father as well. However, the infant can have completely different attachment to each parent. Maybe the child has secure attachment with the father and then an ambivalent attachment with the mother. And so fathers do contribute to a healthy development of a child, but it's not enough that they're just there, that they're just present. It's important that they also engage and be active with the child in order for that healthy development and attachment to occur. When we look at the father's role, we do see that more dads are staying home than ever before, and this is probably due to more mothers working and busier, more hectic schedules that we see in the lives of parents. But we do know that fathers tend to play rougher with their kids than moms do. Moms tend to choose less physical activities like verbal interaction, offering toys, playing conversational games, reading books. And when the child is hungry or sick, they often do tend to turn towards the mom. Fathers, however, play more unpredictable and provide more exciting stimulation. So they tend to be a little more active, a little more hands-on, wrestling, and being more physical with the child than mothers do. Let's take a look at the father's role in attachment with the child. This video is from the UK, so it does reference a department of government that we don't have in America, so just don't be confused by that. But otherwise, it's all very pertinent and relevant to fathers in our culture.
If parenting is not innate or instinctive, how do children benefit from access or contact? The development of attachments to parents and other important caregivers constitutes one of the most critical achievements of the early years. These enduring ties play essential formative roles in later social and emotional functioning. Infant-parent attachments promote a sense of security, the beginnings of self-confidence, and the development of trust in other human beings. Early bonding activities include feeding, reading, or singing to the baby, sharing a bath with the baby, mirroring the baby's movements, letting the baby handle you, for example, feeling the different textures of your face. As the child grows older, you may eat meals together, help with the homework, attend sports events, play card or board games together, have a family night out, or exercise together, biking, swimming, playing tennis, or hiking. In general, the ways in which mothers and fathers establish relationships with and influence their children's development is quite similar. Although much has been made of research showing that mothers and fathers have distinctive styles of interaction with their infants, these differences are actually quite small and do not appear to be formatively significant. The benefits of maintaining contact with both parents exceed any special need for relationships with male or female parents. The empirical literature also shows that infants and toddlers need regular interaction with both of their parents to foster and maintain their attachments. Considerable evidence also now exists that most infants form meaningful attachments to both of their parents at roughly the same time. This is true even though many fathers in our culture spend less time with their infants than mothers do. This indicates that time spent interacting is not the only factor in the development of attachments, although some threshold of interaction is crucial. Most infants come to prefer the parent who takes primary responsibility for their care, typically their mothers. But this does not mean their relationship with the other parent is unimportant. The preference for the primary caretaker appears to diminish with age, and by 18 months this preference often has disappeared. However, some threshold of interaction is crucial if bonding is to be successful with either parent. As far as fathers matter, it was Bowlby who argued that there was a qualitative difference between the love and attention a child receives from the mother as opposed to the father. Children who appear in family court proceedings are the responsibility of the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, or CAFCAS, formerly known as the Family Court Welfare Service. This change was welcomed because the Family Court Welfare Service was part of the Probation Service, and as a consequence their guidance came not from the work of child welfare experts such as Professor Sir Michael Rutter, but from precedents set by judges like Lord Donaldson, reflected in a set of guidelines called the Ascending Ladder of Contact, sometimes employed to determine contact orders. According to these guidelines, fathers only achieve parity with mothers as the child gets much older. But the bonding process works in exactly the same way for both mothers and fathers. If fathers accept these restrictions to their access and contact, it will put them at a serious disadvantage, and their children will suffer. A graphic account of Bowlby's theory and practice was given by the former Home Office Minister Mr. Boating in a seminar on fatherhood in London. We've all seen those sad dads in the Natural History Museum on a Sunday afternoon trying to keep up with their kids. But after a while, dads begin to tire of McDonald's and the museum, and the number of places you can go begins to dry up. As Mr. Boateng would be quick to acknowledge, the Natural History Museum or McDonald's hold no intrinsic value according to the sex of the parent. According to Professor Lamb of Cambridge University, attachment formation involves reciprocal interactive processes that foster the infant's growing discrimination of parents or caregivers, as well as the emotional investment in these caregivers. Infants who receive sensitive and responsive care from familiar adults in the course of feeding, holding, talking, playing, soothing, and general proximity become securely attached to them. Even adequate levels of responsive parenting foster the formation of infant-parent attachments. Although some of these relationships may be insecure, children are nonetheless better off with insecure attachments than they are without attachment relationships at all.
Now that you've finished watching this video, head on over to Moodle to complete lecture activity number 3, and then come on back. See you then. We've talked a lot about temperament and the importance of being aware of the baby's temperament if you are its caregiver. So let's just take a deeper look at what temperament is. Defined, it's basically a child's basic personality. It refers to the individual differences in babies in terms of their emotional, motor, and attentional reactivity, as well as their ability to self-regulate, which is kind of like their ability to control their emotions, self-soothe, things of that nature. And so you could think of it as a child's unique emotional makeup. It's one of the most important dynamics in the parent-child relationship, like we've touched on earlier. And each child is different at birth and therefore needs to be treated differently. So again, the parent needs to be aware of the child's temperament and then parent to that child. So we find through research that temperament is a trait that's fairly stable and consistent, meaning that we usually see a temperament of a baby turn into that baby's personality when they are an adult. So if they are kind of an energetic, happy baby, we tend to find that they're energetic, happy adults. So you might be wondering, well, how do we get our temperament? Are we born with our temperament, or do we get our temperament from the environment in which we live? So here we are back at that nature versus nurture argument. In terms of genetic influences, we do something called twin studies, where they take two twins that have been adopted out by different parents. So they grow up in different environments, however, genetically, they're the same. Generally, they're identical twins, so they're pretty similar genetically. So then we look to see differences between them, and this is a good test of nature versus nurture, because if there are any differences between them, we can usually attribute those differences to the environment. But if there's not any differences between them, then we can attribute those similarities to genetics. And so twin studies do show that temperament may be genetic, especially when it comes to shyness and behavioral inhibition, which just means the ability to control your behavior in different situations and know how to act appropriately to a certain extent. And so we find that if one twin is shy, for example, then the other twin will also be shy, even if they grew up in different households. As far as environmental influences, research does show that the family in which the child develops, the socioeconomic status in which they develop, and the culture influences the temperament they will have as well. And so maybe the way we get our temperament is a combination of both nature and nurture. But we do know that a child's temperament does not always mesh well with their environment. If it's not a good fit, then this can have a negative impact on the developing personality and the child's psychological adjustment. But if it is a good fit, then they tend to develop in a way that's more healthy. So what do we mean by a child not having a good fit with their environment? Well, maybe the child is very energetic and very outspoken, but grows up in a family where they're more reserved and quiet. And so if the child is kind of put down for its energy and enthusiasm, then this could lead to the child having maybe self-esteem issues or not being confident in their abilities or who they are as a person. And so with that said, temperament influences how a child reacts to its environment, which influences how the environment reacts to the child. And what we mean by environment here is people, right? And the setting in which the child grows up. So here we see those reciprocal interactions again. As far as current dominating discussions of temperament, this researcher by the name of Mary Rothbard has identified several dimensions of temperament in infancy. And so what we're looking at then is a continuum of these different dimensions. We're looking to what extent each child has these dimensions. How intense are they within each child? So the first dimension is negative emotionality, and these are feelings of sadness and fear within the child. So for a healthy temperament, you'd want to see kind of lower levels of negative emotionality. The next dimension is called surgency extroversion, and this ranges from a positive approach to others to high intensity pleasure. So how excited does the child get when they are in the presence of other people and those people are socializing with them? And then the last continuum or dimension is orienting regulation, and this is low intensity pleasure. These babies, if they are high on orienting regulation, would tend to be very cuddly and soothe easily, and so their pleasure comes from low activity, low stimulation. So those are the leading ideas on temperament and the different types of temperament within babies. But let's go ahead and take a look at a video that discusses temperament a little bit further.
Babies appear to have unique temperaments or characteristic patterns of responding to the world at birth. These temperamental patterns are biologically based, and they strongly influence the interactions that babies have with their caregivers. Researchers have grouped these temperamental patterns into three broad categories. Some babies are easy, some are difficult, and some are slow to warm up. Easy babies exhibit a generally positive mood. They are easily comforted, eat and sleep on a regular schedule, and readily adapt to new situations.
This is Abby. She is 4 months old, and she eats every 2.5 to 3 hours. She is basically a really happy child. She sits in the summer seat, our exerciser, and our swing. She basically enjoys all of our activities here. She sleeps about 3 to 4 times a day, depending on when she comes in the morning. Basically, she is happy. She's a good child, and she enjoys being at school.
Difficult babies are more negative in mood, and they do not tolerate discomfort, such as hunger, well at all. They are irregular in their eating and sleeping schedules, and can be very hard to comfort when upset.
You think I can turn you over?
Slow to warm up babies are moody and slower to adapt to change. They are often characterized as fussy, showing more negativity in mood than easy babies, but eventually warming up as caregivers persist with attempts to comfort them.
Hayden's temperament is, I believe, very easygoing. He's very jovial, he's very playful, very inquisitive. He tends not to get too whiny unless he's tired, but he tends to hold out as long as he can until he gets tired. So he's a good-natured baby. In the very beginning, because he was so easygoing, we continued with our lifestyle the way that we always had. We went to dinner, we went to the Cape every weekend, you know, we went out to visit friends at parties, and we always brought him with us because he was so easygoing.
She's a great baby. She's very laid back. She's a happy baby. She's very content. She's, you know, all around, she's just she's a well-tempered baby. I've never had a problem with her, ever. You know, being just the typical fussiness. I mean, she's tired, cranky, needs a diaper change, that type of thing. Other than that, she's happy, plays. She's pretty independent too. You know, you can leave her do what you need to do and she'll play by herself.
Sleeps well?
Yep, she goes to bed around 7 and sleeps till about 5:30. So she does really well. Napping during the day, 1 good nap a day, sometimes 1.5. You know, she'll take like an hour nap around 3 or 4.
Babies with different temperaments require different types of parenting, and it is important to note that responsive parenting is predictive of long-term positive outcomes, regardless of temperament.
When we look at early emotional development, some people question if babies are actually sad when they're crying, or is this just their way of communicating that they're hungry or tired or need their diaper changed. So we'll be watching a video in a bit that kind of addresses this question of, do babies have emotion? And in short, the leading idea is that yes, they do. But emotion is not easy to understand. It's not easy to define. We know that it does not exist in only one part of the brain, and we're not sure if it's entirely due to your environment or if emotion is entirely due to biology. So we don't have all of the answers, and some common questions that arise when we're investigating early emotional development is, if there were a list of emotions, what would all the emotions on that list be? How do we learn our emotions, or are we just born with them? Do we all experience emotions at the same intensity, but express them differently based on what our parents taught us? So there's a lot of different questions to be investigated when it comes to emotions. But let's take a look at what we know about babies in terms of their early emotional development. So to address the first question, do babies have emotions? We're going to go ahead and watch this video.
So we've all seen this video, right?
So I let you in, knowing tomorrow.
Touching, yeah, but I had to wonder, could a baby that young really be emotionally affected that way by music? Is this actually what it looks like? Anthony here for D News, and emotional empathy in babies is something that is studied a lot, because the more we know about a child's development, the more we can give it what it needs, understand it, help it grow, even though all babies eventually turn on you. Remember that. Never trust a baby. Anyway, a few studies were released recently that give some insight into whether this little tyke is actually being killed softly by that particular song. The adorable munchkin in that video is 10 months old, and babies begin to recognize when attention is being paid to them right around the 4-month mark. If you look straight at them, their orbitofrontal cortex lights up. They like being looked at, and they seek it out. They know they want attention, and they know how to get it. Babies begin telling lies at 6 months old. Yup. Before they can even talk. It starts with fake laughing and, in some very damning evidence against this emotional baby, fake crying to get sympathy. Are you messing with your mother's emotions, baby? What is going on here? But wait! Another study showing kids' puppets either being nice or mean to each other showed that children as young as 6 months old have differing emotional responses to each situation. They prefer it when the puppets are nice to each other. So they clearly have some ability to be happy and sad, to feel something in reaction to the world around them. But the subtleties of music? Could an infant pick up on that? The interesting thing about babies is that they are constantly trying to become better humans. They are built for it. Let's say that you are watching me touch my foot. You're not just doing it passively. The parts of your brain that are associated with controlling your hands and your feet become active while you watch, along with special bits of the brain called mirror neurons. You are sympathizing with my action, and not just sympathizing, but learning. You become better at touching your foot because you watched me do it. And a study released just this week shows that babies have the same ability, even though we thought they didn't. Watching everything we do makes the corresponding areas of their brains light up. They're trying to empathize. The related connections strengthen, and their brain gets stronger through observing. This kid's mom is obviously very affected by music. It's reasonable to believe that she's seen a lot of her reactions and developed an affinity for music ahead of the curve. Not only that, but another study released this week shows that babies who have more music played for them in the womb during their mother's pregnancy had more developed auditory brain functions and an increased ability for learning and long-term memory. Mom sings this song really well. She's probably practiced quite a bit. This song could be one of the baby's strongest and earliest memories, which would explain emotional attachment to it. So, based on the evidence, I'm going to say yes. This baby is way into the power of music. You may resume tearing up at this emotional moment. It is condoned by science. And hey, if you want to know more about how music affects us, just click some of the videos on the left and subscribe for more D News.
So that last video discussed a piece of research pertaining to when babies watch puppets interact with each other, and one puppet is mean and one puppet is nice, and what's the baby's reaction to that. So this begs the question, do babies have a preference for kindness? And if they do, this would indicate some emotional reactivity to observing other people and how they interact with each other. So let's go ahead and watch that video on the puppets and see how the baby reacts when one of the puppets is mean and vice versa.
Babies know when their diaper is clean or dirty, or when their tummy is empty or full. Just ask any sleep-deprived parent. But can babies tell when someone is acting good or bad?
Babies are oriented towards pro-social individuals. They prefer interacting with a pro-social individual over an antisocial individual.
Psychologist Karen Wynn runs the Yale Infant Cognition Lab. She's studying the roots of morality.
Want to come see some toys?
This experiment demonstrates how 19-month-old Sarah can distinguish a good puppet from a bad one.
We have a puppet who's trying to open a box. He sees a nice toy inside of it, and it's a plexiglass, box that he's just trying to open. He can't lift that lid. Then another puppet comes along and helps him open the lid so that he can get to the toy inside. So that's the helpful puppet. Next, he's again trying to open up the box, and a different puppet comes along and jumps on top of the box lid, slamming it shut and dashing his hopes of getting in there.
Sarah watches the show several times. Afterwards, she'll have to choose which puppet to take a treat away from and to give to a new stuffed animal.
Toddlers are pretty clear in their choice. They will take the treat from the cad who was rude enough to slam the lid shut on the puppet.
That one? Good job!
Addison is just 3 months old. In another experiment, she watches Stripe Puppet play ball with Green Shirt Puppet. When they're done, Green Shirt returns the ball. But when Stripe Puppet plays with Red Shirt, Red just takes the ball. After the show, Addison spends more time paying attention to the good puppet.
We weren't necessarily expecting to find as strong of responses as we have found at such young ages.
Wynn says there are benefits to understanding moral development.
Maybe we'll gain a better understanding of sociopathy or psychopathy. The more we understand about normal development, the better position we are to address problems where it goes awry.
Understanding the human mind, one baby step at a time. For Science Nation, I'm Miles O'Brien.
And then another major question in early emotional development is, are babies wired to feel empathy? And this really kind of piggybacks on the idea that emotional development or emotions are hardwired in us, that emotions are part of our biology. So let's see what's going on in the brain when babies and humans, all humans, including adults, watch other people and experience a sense of empathy or being able to put yourself in another person's shoes and feel what they are feeling.
Hello again. Gaze into a mirror and what do you see? Well, I see my face, of course, but in my face I see moods, I see shifts of feeling. We humans are really good at reading faces and bodies because if I can look at you and feel what you're feeling, I can learn from you, connect to you, I can love you. Empathy is one of our finer traits, and when it happens so easily, perhaps because, and this is brand new science, this is just out of the lab, we may have some special circuitry in our brains that helps us whenever we look at each other. Ask yourself, why do people get so involved, so deeply, deeply involved with such anguish, such pain, such nail-biting tension over football?
Cleveland Browns are gambling on defense.
Why are we such suckers for sports? And it's not just sports. We can lose it completely at the movies, at video games, watching a dance. Is there something about humans particularly, that allows us to connect so deeply when we watch other people? Watch them moving, watch them playing, watch their faces. Well, as it happens, scientists have an explanation for this strange ability to connect. It's new.
It had never been found on the cellular level before.
A set of brain cells found on either side of the head. Among all the billions of long branching cells in our brain, these so-called mirror neurons have surprising power.
What we found is the mechanism that underlies something which is absolutely fundamental to the way that we see other people in the world.
And it began entirely by accident at a laboratory in the lovely old city of Parma, Italy, where a group of brain researchers was working with monkeys. And they were testing a neuron, that's a brain cell, that always made this sound, whenever the monkey would grab for a peanut. So the lab had all these peanuts around, and whenever the monkey made its move, the neuron would fire. Scientists thought, now here's a neuron that is essential to motion. It's a motor neuron. Then one day the monkey was just sitting around, not moving at all, just sitting, when a human scientist came into the lab, and when that scientist grasped the peanut, the monkey's cell fired. Now, the monkey hadn't moved. It was the human that had moved, suggesting that this neuron up here couldn't tell the difference between seeing something and doing something. Seeing and doing were the same. Or more intriguingly, that for this neuron, watching somebody do something is just like doing it yourself. The head of the lab, Giacomo Rizzolatti, thought, wow.
The same neurons, one neuron, fire both when the monkey observes something and when monkey is doing something. It's almost unbelievable.
It was surprising because this cell which was involved with motor planning for the monkey turned out to be interested in the movements of other people as well.
Some people call them monkey see, monkey do neurons, but the name that stuck is mirror neurons, because with them, the brain seems to mirror the movements it sees. This accidental discovery got scientists thinking, doing more tests, and it soon came pretty clear that this is not just a monkey thing, it's a people thing too. We all know that humans learn by looking and copying. That's what infants do. First you look, then you do.
Ready? Let's see your feet this way.
And once you've watched and copied and learned a set of moves, you not only have them in your head.
Look, you put your shoe on. Yeah, she brushed it.
If you see somebody else doing it, you can share the experience.
And you want to do it with me?
They know the moves, you know the moves, so you can move with them.
If you can use the years of training that you yourself have done, learning to crawl, then learning to walk, then learning to eat, this is an incredibly rich set of knowledge that you could apply to the problem of actually seeing what's going on.
So that's why when I head down this street carrying all these packages, not only do people watch, look how they're watching. They feel my predicament, because they know what it's like to carry heavy packages. They all know about carrying. So as they watch me moving, they can feel themselves moving. Their neurons are mirroring the action. These neurons may be the brain's way of translating what we see so we can relate to the world.
The mirror system is the way that you tap into, the way that you harness your own abilities and project them out into the world.
And people are really good at watching and translating what we see. Like with just 13 moving dots, that's all there are here, you'll have no trouble recognizing these very ordinary activities. What's more, tests have shown when a person sees a movie like this of his own movement, he'll recognize it immediately as his own. And that's why sports fans tense with the action and wince and leap, because if you know the game, then your neurons are firing as if it's you playing, giving a whole new meaning to the phrase armchair quarterback. That's why it's so easy to be a sports fan. But there is more, suggests UCLA professor Marco Iacoboni. He thinks mirror neurons tie us not just to other people's actions, but to other people's feelings.
So the idea was to try to figure out how the emotional system and this motor system are connected together. We're going to go in the scanner. What you're going to do is
to demonstrate, he put me into this very powerful fMRI brain scanner that can peer into the brain while it's working. And he gave me some goggles so he could show me pictures when I was in there.
So you can see here the eyeball of Robert.
And once he had a good view into my brain...
Nice looking brain.
Thank you.
Robert, you're not supposed to talk when we scan you, all right?
Sorry. Then he said, okay, I'm going to show you a bunch of faces. And for each face, I want you to imitate it. So I did that. Then he recorded my brain while I moved my facial muscles.
We're going to do right away another one.
Okay. Then he said, okay, same faces, but this time, don't move a muscle. Just look. So I looked. When we checked the results... Oh, there's my brain. I've never seen my brain before.
This is your mirror area.
Iacoboni says that the part of my brain that's working when I make a face, the same part gets busy when I see the face. Plus, when I was looking at these faces, I remember feeling extra uncomfortable, kind of bad. But when these faces came on, I felt better, almost happy. And in fact, at the moment I was looking at the happy face, my brain, and this is my brain, in that instant, see the red area here? It shows activity in the happy, emotional part of my brain. And when I was imitating happy faces, look, I get even a bigger response. This, says Jacoboni, is a consistent result. Mirror neurons, he believes, can send messages to the limbic or emotional system in our brains. So it's possible these neurons help us tune in to each other's feelings. That's empathy.
We strongly believe that that's a unifying mechanism that allows people to actually connect at a very simple level.
You're saying that there's a place in my brain whose job it is to live in other people's minds, live in other people's bodies.
That's right.
Oh, darling, I'm going to die. Don't let me die.
Yeah. And great actors instinctively know that if they put feeling and drama into their bodies,
Hold me tight. Don't let me go.
their faces,
It's dark out there alone.
we will respond.
Can't die. You're too brave to die.
What actors are expert in is using their movements to inspire feelings in the people watching. These are the experts in the mirror system.
We are intensely social creatures. We literally read other people's minds. I don't mean anything psychic like telepathy, but you can adopt another person's point of view.
When you put it together, what do you think it's going to be?
So if mirror neurons help us connect emotionally, what about people who have trouble with this? Kids like Christian, who has autism.
Why do you like Legos?
It's been known for some time that children with autism could be quite intelligent, but have a profound deficit in social interaction.
There he is.
Christian can speak and read and write, but like many kids with autism, he will avoid eye contact. He often misunderstands questions.
So, Christian, can you tell me what you did in school today?
Doing well.
You're doing well?
Everybody wants to know what exactly causes this. So Dr. Ramachandran and his graduate student, Lindsay Schenk, designed an experiment.
So we're going to be reading your brain waves with this cap.
They recorded brainwaves while the kids opened and closed their hands, and while they looked at a movie of somebody else's hands. For most people, the brainwaves look the same either way, whether they're doing or seeing. But for kids with autism, the wave changes, suggesting possibly that autism may have something to do with broken mirror neurons.
Their brains may indeed be different in that regard, and they may have deficits in the mirror neuron system. But we don't know this for sure yet. There needs to be additional work needs to be done using brain imaging.
But what we do know, says Ramachandran, is that healthy human beings are intensely social. More than our cousins the monkeys, we invent ways to connect. We invent dances and handshakes and games to play. We eat together, we meet, and we talk. We talk a lot.
Get away, get away. Everybody's interested in this question. What makes humans unique? What makes us different from the great apes, for example? You can say humor, you're the laughing biped. Language, certainly, okay? But another thing is culture. And a lot of culture comes from imitation, watching your teachers do something.
And here, V.S. Ramachandran makes a big leap. He has proposed that at a key moment in our evolution, this is his guess, our mirror neurons got better. And that made all the difference, he says, because once we humans got better at learning from each other, looking, copying, teaching, we could do things the other creatures couldn't.
In other words, if you are a bear and suddenly the environment turns cold, you need a few million years to develop a polar bear type layers of fat and fur.
It would take many, many, many bear generations to select for furrier bears. But, says Ramachandran,
if you're a human, you watch your father slaying another bear and putting on a fur coat, skinning it, using that as a coat. You watch it, you learn it instantly. Your mirror neurons start firing away in your brain. And you perform the same sequence, complicated sequence. Instead of going through millions of years of evolution, you've done it in one generation.
And while no one's claiming that mirror neurons are the key ingredient that makes us different from other creatures, what these neurons do suggest about us seems almost self-evident. You can see it any Sunday at a sports bar, that deep in our architecture, down in our cells, we are built to be together.
There would be very little point in having a mirror system if you lived on your own. There'd be a lot of point in having a digestive system if you lived on your own. There'd be a good point in having a movement system if you lived on your own. There'd be a good point in having a visual system if you lived on your own. But there'd be no point in having a mirror system. The mirror system is the most basic social brain system. It's a brain system which there's no point in having if you don't want to interact or relate to other people.
But we do like to interact, and maybe now, as never before, we will understand why.
Even though it can be really difficult, let's attempt to define emotion. So we could say that emotion is a feeling and its distinctive thoughts, psychological and biological states, and range of propensities to act. It's extremely difficult to label all the emotions, so psychologists have created some hierarchies. They don't account for blends of emotions like jealousy, however. And so kind of the tops of all the hierarchies, or the main labels of the hierarchies in terms of emotion, or you could think of this as the leading emotions, are anger, which is defined as fury, resentment, animosity; sadness, which is includes grief, sorrow, gloom, melancholy; fear, which includes nervousness, apprehension, dread, fright; enjoyment, which is synonymous with happiness, joy, bliss, delightfulness; love, which is synonymous with acceptance, trust, devotion, adoration; surprise, which is includes shock, astonishment, amazement, wonder; and then finally shame, which includes guilt, embarrassment, mortification, and humiliation. So these, if we were to kind of sum up the emotions or put them in broad categories, these would be the major categories of emotion. So we do know that there are specific facial features for specific emotions that are consistent throughout the world, suggesting that emotions are in fact universal. For example, we know that when someone has contentment for someone else, their upper lip, the right side, kind of curls up, and this is true across all cultures. But this begs the question, if emotions are universal, what purpose do they serve in our survival? Why were we all downloaded, in air quotes, with the same emotions? For example, what would the function of fear be? Why do we experience that emotion? And some psychologists argue that it's for our survival, to alert us to danger, so that the psychological tension that comes from that emotion propels us to act in a way that helps us to survive. So the role of healthy emotions helps children to define their personality. And we know that children need emotional consistency in their environment and as individuals to be well adjusted. Positive emotions help children to feel right about their relationships in the world and how they fit into the world around them. In infancy, emotions generate adaptive functions that help define the meaning of the child's experience. Emotions let infants communicate their needs, in other words. So this sums up Chapter 6. Please go back to Moodle and complete the self-check exercise and the forum. And we'll see you for Chapter 7.